In the rugged hills of Arizona's Sonoran desert, a Mexican cartel thought they'd found an easy target when they illegally seized a drought-stricken farm through fraudulent paperwork. What they didn't realize was that the quiet rancher they'd stolen from wasn't just a simple farmer. He was one of the most decorated Green Berets in U.S. Special Forces history. Now, they're about to learn why you never underestimate a man fighting for his home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Matthew Steele Harrison's weathered face as he stared at the court order in his hands. After 15 years of building his dream in Arizona's Verde Valley, some judge he'd never met had just declared he no longer owned his land. His calloused fingers traced the official seal, mind already analyzing the situation with the same tactical precision that had kept him alive through 3 decades of Special Forces operations. His German Shepherd scout tensed beside him, picking up on his master's controlled anger. The dog had been with him through the worst of times, including the drought that had nearly broken them last season. But they'd survived, adapted, and overcome, just like they'd been trained to do. Now this piece of paper threatened everything they'd built. "Looks official enough," Sheriff Ray Martinez said, genuine regret in his voice as he stood on Harrison's porch. "But something's not right here, Matt. Property transfers don't happen this fast, especially not with all the water rights complications in this valley." Harrison nodded slowly, his quiet demeanor masking the tactical assessment already running through his mind. 20 years in the Special Forces had taught him to see patterns others missed. The judge's signature, the expedited process, the timing. During the worst drought in decades, none of it was coincidental. "How many other farms?" Harrison asked, his voice carrying the calm authority that had once commanded elite soldiers through impossible missions. Martinez shifted uncomfortably. 4 in the last month, all of them struggling with the drought, all of them sold to the same development company, Sonoran Ventures, LLC. By the time anyone starts asking questions, the paperwork's ironclad and the original owners are gone. Harrison's eyes scanned his property, the fields he'd carefully terraced to conserve water, the solar arrays he'd installed to power his innovative irrigation systems, the defensive positions he'd habitually noted even while building a peaceful life. Others saw a modest farm. He saw a battlefield he knew intimately. "They're giving you 72 hours to vacate," Martinez added. "Matt, these people, they're not developers. We've got intel suggesting Sonoran Ventures is a front for the Reynosa Cartel. They're using the drought to acquire properties along the smuggling corridors. Anyone who resists..." He left the threat unspoken. Harrison allowed himself a small smile that never reached his eyes. "They chose the wrong farm, Ray." "Matt, please don't do anything. You've been out of that life for 15 years. These aren't insurgents or warlords. The cartel plays by different rules." "So do I." Harrison's response was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You remember why they called me Steele back in the teams?" Martinez nodded. Everyone in the valley knew Harrison had served, but few knew the full extent of his career in the Special Forces. Fewer still knew about the classified operations, where he'd earned his reputation, not for being hard or cold, but for being unbreakable. Like Steele, he could bend when needed, but never broke. "My grandfather homesteaded this land," Harrison continued. "Taught me that a man's responsibility isn't just to the land he owns, but to the community he's part of. These cartels aren't just stealing farms, they're destroying communities. Someone needs to show them that not everyone can be bullied or bought." Scout growled softly, picking up movement at the edge of the property. A black SUV with tinted windows drove past slowly, its occupants cataloguing the farm's layout. They were professionals, Harrison noted, But they were making the same mistake everyone made, seeing what they expected to see rather than what was actually there. "I've got some calls to make," Harrison said finally. "Old friends who understand what it means to stand against people who take what isn't theirs. You might want to be conveniently busy for the next few days, Ray." "Matt," Martinez hesitated, "just remember, you're not alone here. The whole valley's watching what these bastards are doing. Maybe it's time someone showed them that Arizona farmers aren't as helpless as they think." As the sheriff drove away, Harrison knelt beside Scout, scratching the shepherd's ears while his mind calculated angles, resources, and opportunities. He'd spent his career fighting against those who preyed on the vulnerable. He'd thought those days were behind him, but some battles choose you. "Time to remind them why Green Berets are called the quiet professionals, boy," he murmured. Scout's ears perked up at his master's tone. The dog had been through enough training exercises to recognize when Harrison shifted from farmer to warrior. Inside his modest farmhouse, Harrison opened a hidden panel beneath the floorboards of his study. The cache contained everything he'd hoped never to use again: encrypted satellite phones, tactical gear, and weapons he was licensed to own, but preferred to keep private. Old habits die hard, and 15 years of peace hadn't dulled his preparedness. He reached for the phone, punching in a number from memory. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Blade, it's Steele. Remember that conversation we had about retiring somewhere quiet? How's Arizona sound this time of year?" The response from his former teammate brought the first genuine smile to Harrison's face since receiving the court order. The cartel thought they were simply acquiring another failing farm through fraudulent paperwork. Instead, they'd just started a war with a man who had spent his entire career ending conflicts before anyone knew they'd begun. The real question wasn't whether he could win. It was how to do it in a way that would ensure no cartel ever looked at struggling farmers as easy targets again. Some battles needed to be won so decisively that the echo of their lesson would last for generations. Dawn painted the Sonoran desert in shades of amber and gold as Harrison worked his fields, every movement deliberate and purposeful. To the cartel observers watching from discreet distances, he appeared to be a defeated man going through the motions of his daily routine. They didn't understand that 20 years in special forces had taught him the value of appearing vulnerable while preparing for decisive action. His phone buzzed with encrypted messages as his old team responded to his call. Each reply brought memories of missions in places that didn't officially exist, conducting operations that would never see the light of day. Marcus Blade Rodriguez, their demolitions expert, was already en route from Texas. Sarah Ghost Chen, their intelligence specialist, had accessed satellite imagery of cartel movements in the region. James Doc Williams, their former medic, was calling in favors from contacts in federal law enforcement. "They're watching the main road," Elena Ortiz called out, pulling up in her battered pickup truck. The elderly woman owned the neighboring farm, and her family had worked this valley for generations. Harrison had helped her modernize her irrigation systems during the drought, teaching her children about water conservation and sustainable farming practices. Now, her sharp eyes served a different purpose. "3 vehicles since dawn," she continued, climbing down from her truck. "Black SUVs, same ones that showed up before the Martinez place was seized last month. They're getting bolder, not even trying to hide anymore." Harrison nodded, maintaining his facade of resignation while mentally mapping patrol patterns. "Your family ready, Elena?" "My grandson Miguel already moved the cattle to the high pastures, like you suggested. My daughters are staying with relatives in Phoenix." Her eyes hardened. "But I'm not leaving. This valley raised me, raised my children. Some things are worth fighting for." "It's going to get complicated," Harrison warned, thinking of the arsenal being assembled in his hidden cellar. These people don't play by any rules." Elena's laugh was sharp and fierce. "You think my father didn't teach me to shoot while teaching me to farm? You think mothers in this valley don't know how to protect what's theirs? We're not helpless, Senor Harrison. We've just been waiting for someone to show us how to fight smart instead of fighting scared." Her words triggered memories of other communities he'd worked with during his career, villages in Afghanistan that had learned to resist Taliban pressure, towns in Africa that had organized against warlords. The core principles remained the same: unity, coordination, and the courage to stand together against those who ruled through fear. Harrison's satellite phone vibrated. "Ghost here." Sarah's voice was professional, focused. "Intercepted Cartel. Communications. They're planning to move on your farm tomorrow night. Standard intimidation team first. 8 men, armed. They want to make an example. Show the valley what happens to people who don't take their generous offers to buy during hard times." "They're following their usual pattern," Harrison replied, his tactical mind already processing implications. "Send a message, create fear, then swoop in as saviors offering to buy land from desperate people. How's the background work coming?" "Already found irregularities in the judge's financial records. Offshore accounts, suspicious deposits, FBI's interested but moving slowly. We need to buy time, create evidence they can't ignore." "Time we'll have," Harrison assured her. "Once they commit to moving against this farm, they'll have to see it through or lose face. That's when we'll show them why Green Berets are called force multipliers." Elena watched him end the call, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You're not planning to just save your farm, are you? You're going to break and their entire operation." Harrison allowed himself a small smile. "In Special Forces, we learned that winning one battle doesn't end a war. You have to change the underlying conditions that allowed the problem to develop. These cartels target struggling farmers during droughts, thinking desperation makes us vulnerable. Time to show them that difficult times don't make us weaker, they make us stronger by bringing us together." His phone buzzed again. Blade this time. 2 hours out, brother. Got some interesting toys that'll help even the odds. Remember that trick we pulled in Panama? The one with the pressure sensors and the infrared markers?" "Bring everything," Harrison replied. "But remember, this isn't a military operation. We're not here to destroy them. We're here to teach them a lesson they'll never forget, one that will spread through every cartel network in the region." As if to emphasize his words, another black SUV rolled past his property, its occupants cataloging every detail of what they thought was a vulnerable target. Harrison watched them through practiced eyes, noting their patterns, their professionalism, and most importantly, their assumptions. "Elena," he said quietly, "spread the word. Anyone who wants to stay and help needs to be ready. This isn't just about saving one farm. It's about showing them that when you attack one of us, you face all of us." The older woman nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in his words. As she drove away, Harrison returned to his work, every movement still deliberate, still measured. But now there was an edge to his actions, a controlled power that Scout recognized. The shepherd stayed close, reading his master's subtle shifts in posture and mood. Tomorrow would change everything. But the real victory wouldn't come from defeating cartel thugs. It would come from showing an entire community that they weren't helpless, that together they could stand against any threat. That was the true lesson he'd learned in Special Forces. The greatest weapon against tyranny isn't force, but the courage to stand together against it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The desert heat shimmered across Harrison's fields as his former teammates arrived under the cover of legitimate business. Marcus Blade Rodriguez pulled up in a landscaping truck, his equipment concealing sophisticated surveillance gear. Sarah Ghost Chen, arrived as an agricultural consultant, her tablet containing more than just irrigation data. James Doc Williams came as a visiting veterinarian, his medical bag holding equipment that no ordinary vet would recognize. Harrison watched his team seamlessly integrate into the farm's daily operations, their movements disguising their true purpose. He'd chosen these people for more than their combat skills. Each understood that the most effective operations were the ones that remained invisible until the moment of execution. "Perimeter sensors are active," Ghost reported, her fingers dancing across her tablet, disguised as soil moisture monitors. "Anyone approaches within half a mile will know." She paused, studying data streams. "Cartel's watching, but they're getting sloppy, overconfident. They've done this so many times they're not expecting resistance." "Their mistake," Blade commented, adjusting what appeared to be a sprinkler system but was actually part of an elaborate defensive grid. "Pride comes before the fall, and these guys are due for a hard lesson in humility." Harrison was about to respond when Scout's ears perked up. Moments later, 3 black SUVs appeared on the main road, moving with deliberate purpose. This wasn't their usual surveillance, this was something else. "Right on schedule," Ghost murmured, monitoring their approach through concealed cameras. Lead vehicle carries their negotiator, Eduardo Ramirez, former Mexican Federal Police, now runs acquisition operations for the cartel. Other vehicles have 6 men total, armed, but trying not to show it. "Remember," Harrison cautioned his team, "we're just farmers and local workers. Let them think they have the advantage." He turned to Doc. "How's our community network?" "Elena's grandson Miguel has the high ground with his hunting rifle, officially just watching for coyotes. 3 other farmers, working their fields, have clear views of every approach. Sheriff Martinez is conveniently patrolling the far side of the valley. Everything's set." The SUVs pulled up to Harrison's gate with practiced precision. Eduardo Ramirez emerged from the lead vehicle, his expensive suit and polished shoes incongruous against the dusty farmland. His smile was practiced, professional, and utterly false. "Mr. Harrison," Ramirez called out, approaching with calculated confidence. "I hope you don't mind the unexpected visit. I represent Sonoran Ventures, LLC. We've acquired several properties in this valley, and I wanted to personally discuss your situation." Harrison stood on his porch, projecting the weariness of a farmer, facing hard times, while his military-trained senses catalogued every detail. 2 men by the vehicles, hands near concealed weapons. One moving toward his barn, another circling wide. Standard intimidation formation. They'd done this many times before. "Not much to discuss," Harrison replied, letting defeat color his voice. "Court's made its decision. Got 2 more days before I have to leave." "Ah, but that's why I'm here." Ramirez spread his hands in a gesture of apparent generosity. "The legal proceedings were unfortunate, perhaps rushed. We're willing to offer you a deal, fair market value for the property, plus a generous relocation allowance. You could start fresh somewhere else, somewhere with better water rights." Behind Harrison, Doc busied himself with veterinary supplies, appearing focused on his work while actually monitoring the cartel men's movements through reflected surfaces. Ghost sat at a picnic table, seemingly absorbed in agricultural data while tracking multiple surveillance feeds. "This land's been in my family for generations," Harrison said, letting genuine emotion enter his voice. "Can't put a price on that." Ramirez's smile tightened slightly. "Everything has a price, Mr. Harrison. We're offering you a clean way out. Better than alternatives, yes? Accidents happen on farms, equipment malfunctions, fires start. Why risk such unpleasantness?" The threat was clear, delivered with the confidence of someone used to breaking people's will through fear. But Ramirez had made a critical error, one that came from judging situations based on past experiences rather than present realities. "Funny thing about accidents," Harrison replied, his voice taking on an edge that made Ramirez blink. They work both ways. Your men have been watching my farm, but I wonder who's been watching your operations? For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across Ramirez's face. Harrison's response didn't fit the pattern of intimidated farmers he was used to dealing with. Before he could respond, Ghost's tablet displayed a sequence of images. Surveillance. Photos showing numerous cartel operations throughout the region. Quite an organization you've built, Harrison continued conversationally. Be a shame if certain federal agencies received anonymous tips about property fraud, money laundering, and judicial corruption. Even worse, if evidence started appearing in ways that couldn't be traced or buried. Ramirez's professional mask cracked slightly. You're threatening me? Do you know who you're dealing with? Harrison smiled, and for the first time, Ramirez saw something behind the farmer's facade that made him take an involuntary step back. Do you? 2 days, you said. That works for me. Come back then, bring whatever force you think you need. Just remember, some fights aren't about who's stronger. They're about who's prepared to lose everything to win. As the cartel vehicles departed, Harrison's team gathered around him. They'll be back, Ghost said, monitoring their retreat. With more men, better weapons. Good, Harrison replied, his voice carrying absolute certainty. Let them come in force. Let them commit fully to this fight. Sometimes you have to let your enemy choose the battlefield to show them why they should have chosen peace instead. The sun was setting over the desert, casting long shadows across land that had been fought for and worked by generations of farmers. Tomorrow would bring violence, but it would also bring something else, an opportunity to show an entire community that courage was contagious, that standing together against evil wasn't just about fighting, but about refusing to accept a world where the powerful could prey on the vulnerable. Get some rest, Harrison told his team. Tomorrow, we remind them why Green Berets are called masters of unconventional warfare, and we teach them why you never threaten a man who has nothing left to lose, but everything worth fighting for. Night settled over the Verde Valley as Harrison gathered his team in the barn's hidden command center. Ghost's surveillance screens cast a blue glow over their determined faces as they reviewed their preparations. This wasn't just about defending one farm, it was about changing the entire dynamic of power in the region. Cartels mobilizing, Ghost reported, monitoring encrypted communications. They're calling in specialized teams from Tucson and Phoenix. Ramirez doesn't want to risk any mistakes after your challenge. She paused, analyzing data streams. Thermal imaging shows vehicle movements consistent with arms shipments. They're treating this like a military operation. Harrison nodded, studying the tactical display they'd created. Good. The harder they commit, the more exposed they become. Doc, how's our community network developing? Doc pulled up a detailed map showing positions throughout the valley. Better than expected. Elena's family has organized the eastern farmers. Miguel's got hunters positioned in the high ground, all with legitimate reasons to be there. Martha, Chen's trucking company, is ready to block key routes with mechanical failures when needed. Even the local church group is involved. They're organizing a prayer vigil that just happens to give us eyes on every approach to the valley. Beautiful, Blade commented, genuine admiration in his voice. This is what they never understand about Green Berets. They think we're just soldiers, but our real strength is in building networks, turning communities into defensive systems that don't look like defensive systems. Harrison moved to a workbench where he'd laid out detailed plans of the valley's irrigation infrastructure. That's why we're called force multipliers. Every farmer, every trucker, every hunter in this valley becomes part of our operation, most without even realizing the full scope of their role. Speaking of which, Ghost, how's the social media campaign progressing? Sarah's fingers danced across her keyboard, bringing up multiple feeds. Local Facebook groups are buzzing with rumors about cartel activities. Twitter's picking up stories about judicial corruption. 3 different regional news stations have received anonymous tips about property fraud investigations. The pressures building from angles they can't fight directly. "Remember Panama?" Doc asked, adjusting medical supplies that could serve both legitimate and tactical purposes. "How we turned that cartel's own community against them." Harrison's eyes held a determined glint. "This is different. Better. We're not just fighting against something, we're fighting for something. These people aren't just informants or assets. They're neighbors defending their homes, their way of life. That makes them stronger than any cartel enforcer fighting for a paycheck." A notification pinged on Ghost's system. Incoming message from Elena. Her grandson spotted cartel scouts setting up observation posts on the ridgeline. They're doing this by the book. Full tactical surveillance before the main operation. "Let them watch," Harrison replied, moving to another workbench where Blade was finalizing their technical preparations. "Every minute they spend studying us is another minute we have to prepare. How's the irrigation system coming?" Blade grinned, gesturing to what appeared to be ordinary farming equipment. "On the surface, everything looks normal. But we've got pressure sensors hidden in the water lines, motion detectors disguised as crop monitors, and enough surprises buried in these fields to make any combat engineer proud. Best part is, it all serves a legitimate agricultural purpose. Try proving otherwise in court." Harrison's satellite phone buzzed, another update from their expanding network. Martha Chen's voice was tight with controlled excitement. 2 more families just joined our agricultural cooperative. Their properties give us coverage of the Western approach. Also, that federal agent you contacted? He's positioned his task force nearby, ready to move when we give them something they can't ignore. "Perfect," Harrison acknowledged. "Remember, when it starts, stick to the plan. Everyone has a role, but nobody risks themselves directly. We win this by being smarter, not harder." The team worked through the night, every action serving multiple purposes. To any observer, they appeared to be farmers preparing for normal operations. Even their defensive preparations were disguised as ordinary agricultural activities. This was the art of unconventional warfare, hiding strength in plain sight, turning everyday activities into tactical advantages. "You know what amazes me?" Doc commented, organizing supplies that could serve as either medical equipment or defensive materials. "How quickly people adapt when given a chance to fight back intelligently. These farmers have been dealing with cartel pressure for months, feeling helpless. Now look at them, organizing, coordinating, turning their daily routines into a defensive network." Harrison nodded, pride evident in his expression. "That's the real victory here. Long after we deal with this immediate threat, these people will remember that they're not helpless. They'll maintain these connections, these systems of mutual support. The cartel isn't just going to lose a tactical battle, they're going to lose their ability to intimidate an entire community." Scouts' sudden alertness drew their attention. Through Ghost's surveillance system, they watched another cartel vehicle slowly pass the farm. This one was different, expensive, armored with diplomatic plates. "That's interesting," Ghost murmured, running the plates through her database. "That vehicle belongs to their regional commander. They're taking this seriously enough to bring in senior leadership." "Good," Harrison replied, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that had once led Special Forces teams through impossible missions. "The bigger they make this, the more they commit to the fight, the more decisive their lesson will be. Sometimes the best way to defeat an enemy is to let them think they're in control right until the moment they realize they've lost everything." Oh, as dawn approached, Harrison gathered his team for final preparations. Each person knew their role, understood how their individual actions would contribute to the larger operation. But more importantly, they understood the true purpose behind their mission. This wasn't just about defending one farm or defeating one cartel operation. This was about showing an entire community that with proper organization, coordination, and courage, they could stand against any threat. "Get some rest," Harrison ordered, though he knew sleep would be difficult for any of them. "Tomorrow we remind them why Green Berets are called masters of unconventional warfare, and we show them that the strongest force isn't weapons or money. It's a community united in defense of what's right." The pre-dawn light painted the Arizona sky in shades of purple and gold as Harrison completed his final inspection. His years of Special Forces training had taught him that the most critical moment in any operation wasn't the fight itself, but the quiet moments just before engagement when every detail could mean the difference between victory and defeat. Ghost surveillance systems had detected increased cartel activity throughout the night. Their opponents were mobilizing significant resources, but they were moving with an arrogance that came from too many easy victories. They expected to find a stubborn farmer and perhaps a few armed friends. Instead, they were walking into an operation planned by one of the most experienced unconventional warfare specialists in Special Forces history. "Thermal imaging shows 3 separate groups approaching," Ghost reported from her command station, disguised as a temporary agricultural office. "Main force coming up the Central Valley, 2 flanking elements moving through the arroyos. They're using proper tactical formation, but they're not bothering to mask their heat signatures. They don't expect anyone to be watching." Harrison nodded, checking his encrypted communications one final time. "Elena's network in position." "Better than we hoped," Doc confirmed. "Her grandson Miguel has organized the local hunting club. They're officially conducting pre-dawn coyote control, giving them legitimate reason to be in elevated positions throughout the valley. Martha's trucking company has 3 vehicles with mechanical problems, strategically placed to funnel cartel movements exactly where we want them." The first rays of sunlight caught the dust kicked up by approaching vehicles. Through high-powered optics, Harrison counted 12 SUVs moving in convoy formation. The cartel was committing significant resources to this operation, exactly as he'd planned. Remember, Harrison transmitted to his expanded network, "No direct engagement. We're not here to fight them on their terms. We're here to show them why Green Berets are called masters of unconventional warfare. Execute Pattern Alpha." The operation began not with violence, but with a series of seemingly unrelated events. A local news helicopter appeared overhead, officially covering a story about drought conditions in the valley. 3 different police agencies, responding to anonymous tips, began traffic enforcement operations on key access roads. The local church group's prayer vigil for struggling farmers just happened to position witnesses with cell phone cameras along major approach routes. "They're starting to realize something's wrong," Ghost reported, monitoring cartel communications. "Their tactical teams are reporting too many civilians in the area, too much official presence. They can't operate freely without being observed." Harrison allowed himself a small smile. This was the art of unconventional warfare, not defeating an enemy through direct force, but systematically stripping away their ability to operate effectively. Every cartel vehicle that passed now had its license plate photographed by concerned citizens. Every face was captured on dozens of cameras under legitimate pretenses. "Sir," a new voice crackled over their secure channel. "Robert Chen, Martha's youngest son who worked at the local radio station. That media package you prepared, it's going viral. 3 major networks are picking up the story about judicial corruption in property seizures. Social media's exploding with evidence of cartel activities in the region." The cartel's advance had slowed, their tactical teams trying to assess the suddenly complex situation. They were trained for direct action, for intimidation and violence, but now they faced something different, a battlefield where every civilian was a potential observer, every routine activity a possible counter to their operations. Phase 2, Harrison commanded. Across the valley, his network responded with coordinated precision. The irrigation systems Harrison and Blade had modified activated, turning selected areas into impassable mud. Local farmers began moving equipment in apparently random patterns that just happened to block tactical approaches. The hunting club's coyote control activities kept cartel observers pinned in exposed positions. "They're trying to adapt," Ghost reported, a note of professional admiration in her voice. "Switching to encrypted communications, attempting to establish new approach routes. But they're reacting to ghosts, fighting an enemy they can't see or understand." Harrison watched through his optics as confusion spread through the cartel's formations. Their careful tactical approach was deteriorating into hesitation and uncertainty. Every alternative route they considered was already covered by legitimate civilian activities. Every attempt to establish surveillance was met with coincidental interference. "This is better than Panama," Blade observed, monitoring the pressure. Sensors he'd installed throughout the property. There, we had to fight them directly. Here, we're letting the community itself become our weapon. The cartel's command vehicle finally committed to a direction, leading their main force down the valley's central road. They were attempting to project confidence and power, but Harrison saw the flaws in their formation, the signs of growing uncertainty. "Final phase," he transmitted. "Elena, your people ready?" The older woman's voice carried fierce pride. "Everyone's in position. They'll never know what hit them." As the cartel convoy approached Harrison's farm, they found themselves channeled by a series of seemingly random obstacles: broken-down trucks, agricultural equipment, groups of civilians engaged in ordinary activities. Each obstacle was legitimate, each civilian presence justified, but together they formed an intricate maze that stripped away the cartel's tactical advantages. "Look at their faces," Doc commented, watching through high-powered optics. "They're starting to understand they're in trouble, but they can't figure out why. Can't fight what you can't see." Harrison keyed his radio one final time. "Remember, we're not just defending a farm. We're showing an entire community that the cartels aren't invincible, that with proper organization and courage, any group of people can stand against intimidation and violence. Today, we teach them why you never threaten people who have nothing left to lose, but everything worth fighting for." The sun climbed higher, over the Arizona desert as the trap prepared to spring. The cartel had brought force and violence to threaten a farming community. Instead, they were about to learn why Green Berets were considered the masters of turning entire populations into weapons that no amount of brute force could defeat. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across the valley as the cartel convoy approached Harrison's farm. Eduardo Ramirez, now riding in an armored SUV near the middle of the formation, watched with growing unease as their careful tactical approach encountered one coincidental obstacle after another. "Something's wrong," he muttered into his secure radio. "These farming accidents, the media presence, the police activity, it's too perfect, too coordinated." Harrison monitored their communications through Ghost's surveillance systems, noting the growing tension in their voices. This was the art of psychological warfare, letting the enemy's imagination become their own worst enemy. Every delayed decision, every moment of hesitation worked in their favor. "Local news is reporting on our operation," one of Ramirez's lieutenants reported urgently. "They're calling it a suspected criminal organization, attempting to seize drought-stricken farms through fraudulent means. Our faces are being broadcast live." Ghost's voice carried professional satisfaction as she updated Harrison. "FBI's Financial Crimes Unit just received an anonymous data dump. Complete documentation of the cartel's property fraud scheme, including offshore accounts and judicial bribes. They're mobilizing as we speak. The trap was springing, not through direct confrontation, but through the systematic dismantling of the cartel's ability to operate freely. This was how Green Berets fought, not through superior firepower, but by turning an enemy's strength into a weakness. Multiple police agencies responding to citizen complaints, Doc reported from his observation post. They're setting up roadblocks on all major escape routes. But here's the beautiful part. It's all legitimate law enforcement activity, nothing that can be traced back to us. Harrison watched through his optics as Ramirez's convoy reached the final approach to his farm. The cartel commander was now caught in an impossible position. Too committed to retreat, but increasingly unable to act without exposing his organization to legal scrutiny. "You're up, Elena," Harrison transmitted. "Show them why you don't threaten Arizona farmers." The elderly woman's response came in the form of coordinated action. Across the valley, farming equipment roared to life. Tractors moved in carefully. Planned patterns, herds of cattle were driven in specific directions, and irrigation systems activated in sequence. To any observer, it looked like routine agricultural activity. But together, these movements systematically cut off the cartel's tactical options. "They're trapped," Blade reported with quiet satisfaction. "Every route except the one we've chosen is now blocked by legitimate civilian activity. Best part? Try explaining to a judge how regular farm work constitutes an attack on your organization." Ramirez's frustration boiled over. "Push through," he commanded. "We're not going to be stopped by a bunch of farmers." But as his convoy attempted to advance, they encountered the full sophistication of Harrison's plan. The modified irrigation systems had transformed key areas into impassable mud. Strategic placement of farm equipment forced them to move exactly where Harrison wanted them. Every attempt to establish tactical advantage was met with coincidental civilian presence. "This is what they never understand about Green Berets," Harrison explained to his team. "They think we're just soldiers. But our real strength is in transforming entire communities into defensive networks. Every farmer, every trucker, every civilian becomes part of an invisible resistance that no amount of brute force can defeat." The cartel's professional tactical teams were now discovering the truth of his words. Their military training was useless against this kind of opposition. How do you fight an enemy that never appears? How do you intimidate a community that has found its courage? "Sir," Ghost called out urgently, "intercepted communications indicate they're preparing to abandon protocol. Ramirez is ordering direct action. They're going to try to shoot their way through." Harrison's response was calm, measured. "Exactly. As expected, Elena, implement Phase Delta." Across the valley, camera phones emerged from dozens of hiding places. Local news crews, already positioned under legitimate pretenses, turned their lenses toward the cartel convoy. Any violence would now be captured from multiple angles, documented and broadcast in real time. "Check the news," Doc suggested, monitoring. "Multiple feeds. Every major network is picking up the story. Armed criminal organization threatens Arizona farming community." They're not just facing local law enforcement anymore. They're facing national media attention. Ramirez must have reached the same conclusion. His convoy had ground to a halt, surrounded not by armed opposition, but by the most dangerous weapon of all, witnesses. Dozens of cameras recorded their every move, while legitimate law enforcement closed in from multiple directions. "This is how you win without fighting," Harrison explained to his team. "You don't match force with force. You change the battlefield itself until the enemy's strengths become vulnerabilities. Every tactical team, every weapon they brought, now becomes evidence against them. The sun climbed higher over the Arizona desert as Ramirez faced his impossible choice. His organization had built its power through fear and violence. But how do you intimidate a community that has learned to stand together? How do you fight an enemy that turns your own tactics against you? Harrison watched through his optics, seeing the moment Ramirez understood the true nature of his defeat. The cartel commander had come expecting to crush resistance through superior force. Instead, he found himself caught in a trap where violence would only ensure his organization's destruction. "Remember this moment," Harrison transmitted to his network of farmers and civilians. "Remember that the strongest weapon against tyranny isn't guns or force. It's the courage to stand together, to transform an entire community into something that can't be defeated through intimidation. The real victory wasn't just in stopping the cartel's immediate threat. It was in showing an entire community that they weren't helpless victims, that with proper organization, coordination, and courage, they could stand against any threat, no matter how seemingly powerful." The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Ramirez's convoy remained frozen in their tactical nightmare. Through Ghost's surveillance systems, Harrison monitored the cartel commander's growing desperation. But it was what they couldn't see that was about to change everything. "Sir," Ghost called out, her voice tight with controlled excitement, "remember that data mining operation we started 3 days ago? It just paid off. The cartel's entire regional network is exposed." Harrison moved to her station, studying the intelligence feeds. While the cartel had focused on mobilizing force against his farm, Ghost had been executing a sophisticated cyber operation. Every communication, every financial transaction, every connection was now documented and being fed to multiple law enforcement agencies through untraceable channels. "Their entire command structure is compromised," Ghost explained, displaying complex network diagrams. "Not just the local operation. We're talking international connections, political bribes, money laundering operations. Even their legitimate business fronts are exposed." Doc monitoring police frequencies added another layer to their advantage. FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is moving on their banking connections. DEA's hitting their distribution networks. 3 different state agencies are freezing properties. It's a coordinated takedown, and they don't even realize we triggered it. Harrison watched Ramirez through high-powered optics, seeing the moment the cartel commander started receiving the flood of desperate messages from his organization. This was psychological warfare at its finest, letting the enemy realize that while they focused on one visible threat, they'd left themselves exposed to devastating attacks from unexpected directions. Elena's network is reporting increased cartel movement throughout the region, Blade reported. "They're trying to evacuate key personnel, destroy evidence, but our civilian observers are documenting everything. Every escape route is being watched by concerned citizens with phones and cameras." This was the true art of unconventional warfare. Not just defeating an enemy's immediate force, but systematically dismantling their entire support structure. Harrison had learned in Special Forces that the most effective victories often came, not through direct combat, but through creating situations where the enemy defeated themselves. "Their communications are getting chaotic," Ghost noted, monitoring encrypted channels. "Regional commanders are demanding explanations. International leadership is threatening consequences. Ramirez is being blamed for exposing their entire operation by pursuing a personal vendetta against a simple farmer." Harrison allowed himself a grim smile. The cartel's greatest strength, their hierarchical organization and rigid command structure, was becoming their greatest weakness. Each level of leadership, desperate to protect itself, was turning against the others. "They're starting to understand," Doc observed. "This wasn't just about defending your farm. This was about creating an opportunity to expose and dismantle their entire operation. We didn't just set a trap. We use their own aggression to trigger their destruction. Through his optics, Harrison watched Ramirez receive another urgent message. The cartel commander's face showed a new emotion now, not just frustration or anger, but genuine fear. He was realizing that he hadn't just failed a mission, he had inadvertently triggered the collapse of his entire organization. Now comes the real test, Harrison transmitted to his network. They're going to try something desperate. Be ready. The warning proved prescient. Ramirez, facing pressure from above and disaster from all sides, made the worst possible decision. Take the farm. He screamed into his radio. Kill them all. Make an example. But even this desperate command played into Harrison's strategy. Before the cartel forces could move, Elena's grandson Miguel activated the final phase of their plan. From his position in the hills, he launched a small drone, completely legal, properly registered for agricultural surveys. Its camera began streaming live footage to multiple news outlets. Perfect timing, Ghost reported with satisfaction. Every major network is picking up the feed. Social media's exploding with live coverage. They can't act without the whole world watching. Harrison keyed his radio, speaking directly to Ramirez for the first time since the operation began. Look around you, Commander, really look. You brought force and violence to threaten farmers. Instead, you've exposed your entire organization. Every move you make now only adds to the evidence being gathered. But I'm offering you a choice. Through his optics, Harrison saw Ramirez freeze, realizing the true extent of his situation. The cartel commander was experienced enough to understand that he wasn't just facing tactical defeat. He was witnessing the systematic destruction of everything he had built. You have two options, Harrison continued, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded elite special forces teams. Continue this fight and watch your entire organization burn, or withdraw now and salvage what you can. Either way, you've lost more than you know. This valley is now beyond your reach forever. The psychological pressure was absolute. Every passing minute brought news of another operation compromised, another asset seized, another connection exposed. Ramirez's own men were starting to withdraw without orders, more concerned with self-preservation than following commands. This is why Green Berets are different, Harrison explained to his team. We don't just fight battles, we transform entire environments. Every farmer with a phone becomes a surveillance asset. Every community member becomes part of an invisible resistance. We turn the enemy's strength into their weakness, their aggression into the trigger of their own destruction. The sun reached its zenith over the Arizona desert as Ramirez faced the most difficult decision of his career. He had come to crush resistance through overwhelming force. Instead, he found himself caught in a sophisticated trap that had turned his own organization's power against itself. The real victory, Harrison knew, wasn't just in defeating the cartel's immediate threat. It was in showing an entire community that with proper organization, intelligence, and courage, they could transform themselves from victims into an undefeatable force. That was the true lesson of unconventional warfare. The strongest weapon against tyranny isn't force, but the wisdom to turn an enemy's strength into the cause of their own defeat. The moment of decision arrived with the precision of a well-planned military operation. Ramirez, trapped in a situation that deteriorated, by the minute, received the final piece of intelligence that shattered his remaining resolve. His personal phone, which he believed secure, displayed a simple message from an unknown number. Detailed information about his family's safe houses, his emergency extraction plans, and his offshore accounts. That's the beauty of modern warfare, Ghost explained to the team, monitoring the cartel commander's reaction through high-resolution cameras. While they focused on physical force, we were dismantling their digital infrastructure. Every system they relied on for security is now compromised. Harrison watched through his optics as Ramirez processed the implications. The cartel commander had risen through ranks by being smarter than his opponents, by understanding when to fight and when to withdraw. Now that same intelligence was forcing him to confront an uncomfortable truth. He wasn't just facing tactical defeat, but complete, strategic collapse. Their entire command structure is fracturing, Doc reported, monitoring multiple communication channels. Regional leaders are turning on each other, trying to distance themselves from this operation. Their legitimate business fronts are scrambling to cut ties. The whole house of cards is coming down. But Harrison knew the most dangerous moment in any operation was when a cornered enemy faced complete defeat. Through years of Special Forces experience, he'd learned that proud men often chose catastrophic violence over graceful surrender. "Movement at the rear of their formation," Blade called out urgently. "They're preparing heavy weapons. Looks like they're choosing to go down fighting." This was the moment Harrison had prepared for. With precise timing, Elena's network activated, the final phase of their plan. Across the valley, church bells began ringing. It was a pre-arranged signal that sent hundreds of community members into coordinated action. Farmers emerged from their fields, forming a human chain across access roads. Local business owners gathered in peaceful groups, smartphones recording every movement. The hunting club, still officially conducting predator control, maintained their elevated positions with clear views of the entire area. "This is psychological warfare at its finest," Harrison explained to his team. "They came prepared to fight shadows, to crush resistance through violence. Instead, they're facing the most powerful weapon of all, a community that's no longer afraid." Through Ghost's surveillance feeds, they watched Ramirez's tactical teams hesitate. These were hardened men, experienced in violence and intimidation. But their training hadn't prepared them for this. Hundreds of ordinary citizens standing openly against them, backed by media coverage and legal observation. "Sir," Ghost reported, monitoring encrypted channels, "Cartel's international leadership is sending direct orders. They're cutting their losses, ordering immediate withdrawal. This operation has exposed too much of their network. They're facing investigations in 3 countries now." Harrison keyed his radio one final time, speaking directly to Ramirez. "You understand now, Commander, this wasn't about defending one farm. This was about showing an entire community how to stand against intimidation. Every move you made didn't just threaten farmers, it exposed your organization's vulnerabilities. The more force you brought, the more evidence you created." The cartel commander's response came in the form of a simple hand gesture. His men began standing down, weapons lowered but not disappeared. It was a professional's recognition of defeat, an acknowledgement that sometimes the wisest course was strategic withdrawal. "Watch their formation," Harrison instructed his team. "This isn't over. Wounded predators are the most dangerous." But Ramirez had learned his lesson. His withdrawal was as professional as his advance had been, maintaining tactical discipline even in defeat. Through their surveillance, Harrison's team watched the cartel forces pull back, their movements showing the kind of respect usually reserved for worthy military opponents. "They still don't fully understand," Doc observed, monitoring their retreat. "They think they fought a brilliant military operation. They don't realize they were defeated by farmers with phones, by a community that learned to stand together." Harrison nodded, pride evident in his expression as he watched the valley's residents maintain their positions. Every person who stood openly against the cartel today had overcome something more powerful than physical fear. They'd overcome the psychological intimidation that had kept them isolated and vulnerable. "This is what they never taught us in Special Forces training," Harrison told his team. The most powerful weapon in unconventional warfare isn't technology or tactics. It's showing people that they're stronger than they know, that together they can stand against any threat. As the cartel forces disappeared into the distance, Elena approached Harrison's position. The elderly woman's eyes held a fierce pride that spoke of generations of farmers who had worked this land. "They'll come back," she said, but her voice carried no fear. "Different cartel, different tactics, but they'll try again." Harrison smiled, gesturing to the hundreds of community members still holding their positions, still documenting everything through their phones. "Let them come. They'll find something they don't expect. Not just farmers and ranchers, but a community that knows its strength. That's the real victory today. We didn't just defeat one cartel operation. We showed an entire valley that with proper organization and courage, they never have to be victims again." The Arizona sun began its descent, casting long shadows across land that had been transformed not by violence, but by the courage of ordinary people standing together. Harrison watched his neighbors dispersing, knowing that while the immediate battle was won, the real victory was in what these people had discovered about themselves. "This is how you win the long war," he told his team. "Not by fighting every battle yourself, but by teaching others how to stand against intimidation. The cartels might forget today's tactical defeat, but this community will never forget what they learned about their own strength." Evening settled over the Verde Valley as Harrison and his team assessed the aftermath of their operation. Ghost's surveillance systems tracked the cartel forces' withdrawal while monitoring their encrypted communications. The messages painted a picture of an organization in crisis, struggling to contain the damage from their catastrophic miscalculation. "Their international leadership is in chaos," Ghost reported, analyzing data streams. "The evidence we exposed has triggered investigations in 7 countries. Banking records, property holdings, political connections. Everything they built through years of intimidation is unraveling in hours." Harrison nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed police agencies moving to secure previously hidden cartel assets throughout the region. But his attention was focused on something more significant, the transformation he saw in his neighbors' faces. 4 different farming communities have already reached out, Doc announced, checking his communications. "They want to learn how to set up similar defense networks. The model we created here is spreading." This was the true art of unconventional warfare, creating effects that rippled far beyond the immediate battlefield. Harrison had learned in special forces that the most decisive victories often came not from what you destroyed, but from what you helped others build. "Sir," Blade called out, monitoring their perimeter security, "you need to see this." Through their surveillance feeds, they watched something extraordinary unfold. Farmers from neighboring valleys were arriving, not with weapons or tactical gear, but with food, supplies, and offers of support. The community's response to victory wasn't celebration. It was strengthening the bonds that had made that victory possible. "This is how you win the peace after winning the fight," Harrison explained to his team. "The cartels rule through fear and isolation. We've shown people a different kind of strength, the power of a community that stands together." Elena arrived with new intelligence from her network. The elderly woman's eyes held a fierce satisfaction as she reported. "The cartel's local enforcers are abandoning their positions. 3 of their legitimate business fronts have already put themselves up for sale. They're not just retreating, they're evacuating." But Harrison's experience told him this crucial moment carried its own dangers. "Ghost, maintain surveillance. Doc, keep the medical teams on standby. Blade, those defensive preparations we discussed, implement them now." His team moved with practiced efficiency, understanding without explanation. They'd learned in combat that the aftermath of victory could be as dangerous as the battle itself. Wounded organizations, like wounded animals, often struck out desperately before accepting defeat. Multiple police agencies requesting our documentation, Ghost reported. FBI, DEA, state investigators, they all want to understand how a farming community managed to dismantle a cartel operation that had stumped them for years. Harrison smiled, remembering similar situations in his Special Forces career. Give them the evidence, but maintain operational security. Let them focus on the criminal enterprise. Our real achievement is something they wouldn't understand. Anyway, through their surveillance systems, they watched the valley transform. Farmers who had once stayed isolated behind locked gates were now organizing community patrols. Families that had lived in fear were setting up communication networks. Every person who had stood against the cartel was now teaching others what they had learned about collective strength. "Sir," Doc called out, genuine awe in his voice, "you need to hear this." He activated the local radio feed. Across multiple channels, people were sharing their stories, not just about today's victory, but about years of intimidation and fear. Each testimony ended the same way, with a commitment to stand with their neighbors, to never again allow criminals to prey on their community. "This is psychological warfare at its finest," Harrison told his team. "The cartels don't just lose territory, they lose the fear that gave them power. Every person who stands up inspires 10 more to find their courage." A notification pinged on Ghost's system. Cartel's international leadership has made their decision. They're declaring this entire region off-limits to their operations. The cost of engaging an organized community is too high. But Harrison knew better than to celebrate too early. They'll adapt, try different tactics. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but they'll test us again. Elena nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in his words. And they'll find us stronger. Every day, more people join our network. Every week, we learn new ways to protect each other. They thought they could defeat farmers through fear. Instead, they taught us how to be warriors. The sun's last rays painted the Arizona sky in brilliant colors as Harrison gathered his team for a final assessment. Through their various monitoring systems, they tracked the ripples of their victory spreading across the region. Police moving on exposed cartel assets, communities organizing their own defense networks, ordinary citizens finding extraordinary courage. "This is what they never understood about Green Berets," Harrison explained. "Our greatest victories don't come from our own strength, but from teaching others to find theirs. Every farmer with a phone becomes a sentinel. Every community meeting becomes a tactical planning session. We don't just defeat the enemy, we transform the entire battlefield until their strength becomes their weakness." As night fell over the valley, Harrison watched his neighbors moving with new confidence, coordinating their activities with unconscious tactical precision. The cartel had come expecting to crush resistance through superior force. Instead, they had inadvertently created something they couldn't defeat, a community that had discovered its own power. "Remember this moment," he told his team, "not because we won a battle, but because we showed people something more important than any tactical victory. We showed them that the strongest weapon against tyranny isn't guns or force. It's the courage to stand together, to transform fear into strength, isolation into unity." The real victory, Harrison knew, wasn't in defeating one cartel operation. It was in creating a model of resistance that would spread far beyond this valley, showing other communities that they never had to be victims, that with proper organization, courage, and unity, ordinary people could stand against any threat, no matter how seemingly powerful. The following morning brought new challenges as Harrison and his team monitored the evolving situation. Federal law enforcement had descended on the valley, processing evidence and interviewing witnesses. But beneath the official investigation, something more significant was taking root. 3 more communities have adopted our defense network. Model, Ghost reported, tracking communications across the region. They're not just copying our tactics, they're improving them, adapting them to their specific situations. It's spreading faster than we anticipated. Harrison studied the tactical displays showing civilian activity throughout the valley. Where once there had been isolated farms and fearful silence, now there was constant communication, coordination, and mutual support. The transformation went deeper than simple security measures. Local business owners are organizing their own information-sharing network, Doc added, reviewing reports from their expanding community contacts. They're using legitimate commerce to track suspicious activities, sharing data through ordinary business transactions. The cartels won't just face tactical resistance, they'll face economic isolation. Eleanor arrived with reports from her own network, her weathered face showing fierce pride. The church groups have started what they're calling community resilience meetings. On the surface, they're about drought preparation and mutual aid, but they're really teaching people how to organize, how to support each other against intimidation. Harrison nodded, recognizing patterns he'd seen in successful special forces, operations around the world. This is how you create lasting change, not through force, but by helping people discover their own strength. Every community meeting, every new connection, builds something the cartels can't defeat through violence. Through their surveillance systems, they watch the valley's transformation accelerate. Farmers who had once avoided eye contact now coordinated their activities with tactical precision. Local youth groups, guided by former military members in the community, learned to observe and report suspicious activities while conducting legitimate outdoor programs. "Sir," Ghost called out, monitoring encrypted channels. "We're picking up interesting chatter. Other criminal organizations are warning their people away from this region. They're calling it the dead zone, not because of violence, but because organized crime can't operate here anymore." Blade, returning from a perimeter check, added another layer to their success. Local contractors are incorporating defensive features into their building projects. Not military fortifications, but subtle improvements that make properties harder to intimidate. They're calling it resilient architecture. This was the true art of unconventional warfare, not just winning tactical victories, but transforming entire environments until the enemy's traditional advantages became liabilities. Harrison had learned in special forces that the most effective defense wasn't a wall or a weapon, but a community that refused to be victimized. "We've got movement," Doc reported suddenly. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the south. But this is different. Civilian vehicles, local plates." Through their optics, they watched a convoy of trucks and cars approach Harrison's farm. But instead of cartel enforcers, these vehicles carried farmers, ranchers, and business owners. From neighboring valleys, they came not seeking protection, but wanting to learn. "This is what the cartels fear most," Harrison explained to his team. "Not our tactical victory, but what it represents. Every person who learns to stand against intimidation becomes a teacher for others. The strength spreads, grows, becomes something no amount of violence can suppress." Elena's grandson Miguel, who had played a crucial role in their defensive operations, arrived with news from the younger generation. The local tech school is starting a community security program. On paper, it's about cybersecurity and emergency response. But they're really teaching people how to protect their communities using technology and information sharing. Harrison smiled, remembering similar programs he'd helped establish in conflict zones around the world. The best defense isn't secrecy, it's turning ordinary activities into protective measures. Every student who learns these skills becomes part of an invisible resistance that no cartel can effectively fight. As the day progressed, more visitors arrived seeking guidance and support. But Harrison noticed something remarkable. They weren't coming to him or his team for solutions. Instead, the community members who had stood against the cartel were becoming teachers themselves, sharing their experiences and insights. "This is how you win the long war," he told his team. Watching farmers teach others about coordinated observation networks disguised as agricultural cooperation. Not by creating dependency, but by helping people discover their own capabilities. Every person who learns to resist intimidation becomes a force multiplier for positive change. The sun climbed high over the Arizona desert as Harrison observed the valley's continued transformation. What had started as one farmer's stand against injustice had become something far more powerful. A model of community resistance that could spread and adapt, showing others that they never had to face threats alone. The real victory, he explained to a group of visiting community leaders, isn't in defeating one cartel operation. It's in proving that ordinary people, working together with purpose and courage, can create something stronger than any criminal organization. You don't need special training or weapons. You just need the wisdom to stand together, to turn your daily activities into a defense network that no amount of intimidation can break. As evening approached, Harrison gathered his team for a strategic assessment. Through their various monitoring systems, they tracked the ripples of change spreading across the region. But the most significant transformation wasn't visible on any tactical display. It was in the eyes of people who had discovered their own strength. "Remember," he told his team, "the greatest weapon in unconventional warfare isn't force or technology. It's showing people that they're stronger than they know, that together they can build something no enemy can defeat. That's the real legacy of what we've started here. Not just a tactical victory, but a transformation that will continue long after we're gone." A week after the cartel's retreat, Harrison stood in his command center, analyzing intelligence reports with his team. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but experience had taught him that true victory required consolidation and adaptation. Through Ghost's sophisticated monitoring systems, they tracked an evolving situation that went far beyond their initial success. "Multiple cartels are adapting their strategies," Ghost reported, analyzing encrypted communications. "They're shifting away from direct intimidation, trying to infiltrate communities through legitimate businesses. But our network is already identifying their patterns. Every attempt at penetration meets organized legal resistance." Harrison studied the tactical displays showing civilian activity across multiple valleys. The transformation had exceeded even his experienced expectations. Communities weren't just defending themselves. They were evolving their own sophisticated security measures, each adapted to local conditions and capabilities. "The agricultural cooperative has expanded," Doc announced, reviewing economic data. 17 communities have joined. On paper, it's about sharing resources during the drought. In reality, it's become an intelligence network that can identify and isolate criminal activities through legitimate business operations. Elena arrived with reports that demonstrated the depth of change. The Women's Church Auxiliary has created what they call a community wellness program. They're teaching everything from first aid to emergency communications, disguised as disaster preparedness. Every session builds our defensive capabilities while appearing completely innocent. Harrison nodded, recognizing patterns from his Special Forces experience. This is advanced unconventional warfare. The best defense isn't hiding your strength. It's making it appear so natural that no one questions it. Every ordinary activity becomes part of a sophisticated resistance network. Through their surveillance systems, they observed new developments that would have been impossible weeks earlier. Local businesses had created a mutual support system that could identify and isolate suspicious activities without appearing coordinated. Youth sports programs incorporated observation and reporting skills into regular training. "Sir," Ghost called out, monitoring regional communications, "we're seeing something remarkable. Other communities are developing their own unique defense models. Each one is different, adapted to local conditions, but all based on the principles we demonstrated. It's becoming impossible for criminal organizations to establish patterns of response." Blade, returning from a coordination meeting with local contractors, provided another perspective. They're incorporating defensive features into everyday construction, not obvious security measures, but subtle design elements that make properties naturally resistant to intimidation. Even the landscaping is being planned for tactical advantage. This was the sophistication of Green Beret methodology, not just defeating an enemy, but transforming entire environments until their traditional advantages became vulnerabilities. Harrison had seen similar principles succeed in conflicts around the world, but never with such organic adaptation. Multiple federal agencies requesting consultation, Doc reported, checking secure communications. They're trying to understand how a rural community developed such an effective counter-cartel operation, but they're missing the point. Our tactical success was just the catalyst for something much more significant. Harrison moved to the tactical displays, studying patterns of civilian activity that would appear random to outside observers, but represented sophisticated coordination. The real victory isn't in what we did. It's in what we helped others discover about themselves. Every community that learns these principles becomes not just resistant to intimidation, but a teacher for others. Elena's network reported new developments that demonstrated this evolution. Local schools had incorporated critical thinking and situational awareness into their curriculum, disguised as environmental education. Business associations had developed information-sharing systems that could track suspicious activities through normal commerce. This is what special forces understood that conventional military never grasped, Harrison explained to his team. The most effective resistance isn't about weapons or tactics. It's about transforming ordinary activities into extraordinary defenses. Every farmer becomes a sentinel, every business transaction a potential intelligence source. Through their monitoring systems, they tracked the ripple effects of their success spreading across the region. Communities that had once lived in fear were developing their own unique approaches to collective security. Each success inspired others, creating a network of resistance that grew stronger through diversity rather than uniformity. "The cartels are facing something they've never encountered," Ghost noted, analyzing intelligence feeds. "They can't fight what they can't identify. Every attempt to assert control reveals more of their operations while strengthening community bonds. They're not just losing territory, they're losing the ability to operate effectively." As evening approached, Harrison received reports from neighboring valleys that confirmed their strategic success. Communities weren't just copying their defensive model, they were improving it, adapting it to local conditions, creating something more sophisticated than any single plan could achieve. "This is the art of unconventional warfare," he told his team, "not just winning battles, but inspiring transformations that continue long after the immediate conflict ends. We didn't just show people how to resist intimidation, we helped them discover their own capacity for extraordinary achievement." The sun set over the Arizona desert as Harrison observed the continued evolution of what they had started. What began as one farmer's stand against injustice had become a movement that no force could effectively counter because its strength lay not in confrontation, but in transformation. Remember, he told visiting community leaders, the greatest victory isn't in defeating your enemies, it's in building something they can't defeat. When ordinary people discover their collective strength, when daily life becomes part of an invisible resistance, no amount of force can impose control through fear. 2 weeks after the cartel's retreat, Harrison received intelligence that confirmed his strategic predictions. Criminal organizations across the Southwest were facing an unprecedented crisis. Their traditional methods of intimidation and control were failing against a new kind of resistance they couldn't effectively counter. Multiple cartels are calling emergency leadership meetings, Ghost reported, monitoring encrypted communications. Their internal documents show growing panic. Every attempt to reassert control in the region meets organized civilian resistance that appears completely legitimate. They can't fight what they can't identify or understand. Harrison studied the tactical displays in his command center, noting patterns that would be invisible to untrained observers. The transformation had spread far beyond their initial victory, evolving into something more sophisticated than even he had anticipated. The farming cooperative has expanded into 3 states, Doc announced, analyzing economic data. On the surface, it's about drought resistance and resource sharing, but it's become an early warning system that can identify and isolate criminal activities through normal business operations. Even their accountants are unknowingly part of our intelligence network. Elena arrived with news that demonstrated the depth of change. The Regional Church Council has integrated what they call community resilience training into their regular programs. They're teaching everything from emergency communications to coordinated response protocols, all disguised as disaster preparedness. Every congregation becomes another node in our defensive network. Through their surveillance systems, they observed developments that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. Local businesses had created informal but sophisticated methods of tracking suspicious activities through ordinary transactions. Youth organizations incorporated observation skills into regular activities. Even the local arts council had become an effective intelligence gathering network through their community documentation projects. "Sir," Ghost called out, monitoring regional communications, "we're seeing something extraordinary. Criminal organizations can't establish new operations anywhere in the region. Every attempt meets coordinated civilian resistance that appears completely spontaneous and legitimate. They're calling it the invisible wall." Blade, returning from meetings with local contractors, provided another perspective. Construction. Companies across 3 states are incorporating defensive architecture into their standard designs. Not obvious security features, but subtle elements that make properties naturally resistant to criminal activity. They're marketing it as sustainable community design. Yeah, this was the sophistication of Green Beret methodology taken to its highest level, not just defeating an enemy, but transforming entire societies until their normal functions became part of an invisible defense network. Harrison had implemented similar principles in conflict zones worldwide, but never with such organic adoption and evolution. "Federal agencies are struggling to understand what's happening," Doc reported, reviewing official communications. Their analysts can't explain how criminal organizations are losing control of territories without any visible resistance. They're looking for tactical operations, but missing the strategic transformation. Harrison moved to the command center's main display, studying patterns of civilian activity that represented sophisticated coordination invisible to outside observers. This is what we learned in Special Forces. The most effective resistance isn't about fighting, it's about transforming. communities until normal daily activities become part of an undefeatable defense network. Elena's grandson Miguel arrived with reports from the younger generation that showed another dimension of their success. Local technical schools had incorporated cybersecurity and information analysis into their regular curriculum. Business colleges were teaching supply chain monitoring disguised as efficiency management. The cartels are facing their worst nightmare, Ghost noted, analyzing intelligence feeds. They can't fight an enemy they can't see or understand. Every attempt to reassert control exposes more of their operations while strengthening community bonds. They're not just losing territory, they're losing the ability to operate effectively anywhere in the region. Through their monitoring systems, they tracked the exponential spread of their success. Communities that had once lived in fear were developing sophisticated resistance methods adapted to their specific situations. Each success inspired others, creating an evolving network of civilian defense that grew stronger through diversity and adaptation. This is why Green Berets are different, Harrison explained to his team. We don't just win battles, we transform environments until the enemy's traditional advantages become vulnerabilities. Every normal activity becomes part of an invisible but undefeatable resistance network. As evening approached, Harrison received reports from across the southwest that confirmed their strategic victory. Communities weren't just copying their defensive model, they were improving it, adapting it to local conditions, creating something more sophisticated than any single plan could achieve. Remember, he told visiting community leaders, the greatest victory isn't in fighting your enemies, it's in building something they can't effectively fight against. When entire communities transform their daily activities into sophisticated defense networks, no amount of force or intimidation can impose control through fear. The sun set over the Arizona desert as Harrison observed the continued evolution of what they had started. What began as one farmer's stand against injustice had become a movement that no criminal organization could effectively counter, because its strength lay not in confrontation, but in transformation of ordinary life into extraordinary resistance. 3 weeks after their initial victory, Harrison and his team discovered that their success had triggered changes far beyond their original objectives. Through Ghost's sophisticated monitoring systems, they observed transformations occurring at a systemic level that even their extensive special forces experience hadn't fully anticipated. International criminal organizations are fundamentally altering their operations, Ghost reported, analyzing encrypted communications from multiple sources. They're abandoning traditional intimidation tactics entirely in this region. Their internal assessments show that every attempt to establish control through force now results in catastrophic exposure of their broader networks. Harrison studied the tactical displays, noting patterns that revealed a deeper strategic victory. The transformation hadn't just defeated one cartel operation, it had rendered an entire criminal business model obsolete within the affected territories. The Agricultural Alliance has evolved into something unprecedented, Doc announced, reviewing economic data streams. 17 counties have integrated their legitimate business operations into an invisible early warning system. Every normal transaction now carries metadata that helps identify and isolate suspicious activities. The cartels can't move money, resources, or personnel without detection. Elena arrived with intelligence that demonstrated the sophistication of their success. The community's defensive network had developed organic complexity that made it virtually impossible to counter. The Regional Interfaith Council has created what they're calling community harmony initiatives. On the surface, it's about social cooperation. In reality, it's a sophisticated coordination system that can mobilize thousands of citizens for legitimate activities that just happen to disrupt criminal operations. Through their surveillance systems, they observed developments that showcased the evolutionary nature of their victory. Local businesses had developed informal but highly effective methods of sharing intelligence through normal customer service interactions. Educational institutions had incorporated critical awareness training into standard curricula. Even social media networks had become powerful tools for coordinated community defense, all while appearing completely innocent. "Sir," Ghost called, out monitoring global communications, "we're seeing something remarkable. Criminal organizations worldwide are reclassifying this entire region. They're calling it the Ghost Zone, not because of military presence, but because organized crime literally cannot establish operational footholds here. Every attempt disappears into what they're describing as an invisible resistance network." Blade, returning from coordination meetings with regional contractors, provided another dimension of their success. Construction companies across 5 states have started incorporating what they call community-centric design principles. It's defensive architecture disguised as environmental sustainability. Every new building project naturally channels criminal activities into areas of maximum community surveillance. This represented the highest evolution of unconventional warfare principles, not just defeating an enemy, but transforming entire societies until normal daily functions became sophisticated defense mechanisms. Harrison had implemented similar strategies in conflict zones worldwide, but never with such organic adoption and evolution. Federal agencies are requesting expanded consultation, Doc reported, reviewing official communications. Their analysts can't explain how criminal organizations are losing operational capability across entire regions without any visible resistance. They're looking for traditional counter-cartel operations, but missing the fundamental transformation of community dynamics. Harrison moved to the command center's main display, studying patterns of civilian activity that represented incredibly sophisticated coordination invisible to outside observers. This is what we learned in the most challenging special forces operations. The most effective resistance isn't about confrontation. It's about transforming societies until normal daily activities become part of an undefeatable defense network. Miguel, Elena's grandson, who had helped coordinate youth involvement, arrived with reports that demonstrated another aspect of their strategic success. The Regional Tech Alliance has integrated what they call community data awareness into standard business practices. Every normal digital transaction now carries pattern recognition markers that help identify criminal activities while appearing completely legitimate. The cartels are facing systemic collapse in these territories, Ghost noted, analyzing intelligence feeds. They can't fight what they can't identify or understand. Every attempt to adapt their operations reveals more vulnerabilities while strengthening community resilience. They're not just losing territory, they're losing the ability to operate effectively anywhere this model spreads. Through their monitoring systems, they tracked the exponential growth of their strategic victory. Communities that had once lived in fear had developed sophisticated resistance methods adapted to their specific situations. Each success inspired others, creating an evolving network of civilian defense that grew stronger through diversity and adaptation. This is why Green Beret methods are uniquely effective, Harrison explained to visiting community leaders. We don't just win tactical battles, we transform environments until the enemy's traditional advantages become catastrophic vulnerabilities. Every normal activity becomes part of an invisible but undefeatable resistance network. The evening Sun cast long shadows across the Arizona desert as Harrison observed the continued evolution of what they had initiated. What began as one farmer's stand against injustice had become a movement that no criminal organization could effectively counter, because its strength lay not in confrontation, but in the transformation of ordinary life into extraordinary resistance. "Remember," he told his team as they reviewed the day's developments, "the greatest victory isn't in defeating your enemies. It's in building something they can't effectively fight against." When entire communities transform their daily activities into sophisticated defense networks, no amount of force or intimidation can impose control through fear. 1 month after their initial victory, Harrison received intelligence that confirmed their success had catalyzed change at institutional levels. Law enforcement agencies across multiple states were studying the Verde Valley model, not understanding that its true power lay not in tactical operations, but in fundamental social transformation. Major law enforcement academies are revising their training programs, Ghost reported, monitoring official communications. They're incorporating what they call community-integrated defense protocols. But they're missing the core principle. This wasn't about creating new security systems. It was about transforming normal community activities into natural defensive networks. Harrison studied the tactical displays, showing civilian activity patterns across multiple states. What began as a defense against cartel intimidation had evolved into something more profound. A new model of community organization that naturally prevented criminal enterprises from gaining footholds. The Regional Business Alliance has implemented what they're calling integrated commerce security, Doc announced, analyzing economic data. Every legitimate transaction now carries pattern recognition markers that make illegal operations visible, but the brilliance is in its simplicity. It all appears as normal business optimization to outside observers. Sarah Chen, Ghost's civilian counterpart who coordinated local tech initiatives, arrived with reports that demonstrated the sophistication of their success. The software developers cooperative has created applications that look like normal business efficiency tools. In reality, they're sophisticated monitoring systems that can identify criminal patterns through everyday commercial activities. Through their surveillance network, they observed developments that showcase the evolutionary nature of their victory. Local governments had integrated community defense principles into ordinary civic functions. Educational institutions had developed curricula that taught strategic awareness through standard subjects. Even social media had become an effective tool for coordinated community defense while appearing completely ordinary. "Sir," Ghost called out, monitoring international communications, "criminal organizations worldwide are rewriting their operational manuals. They're classifying this entire region as tactically inverted territory, areas where their traditional methods of establishing control actually work against them. Every attempt to assert influence exposes their broader networks to disruption." Blade, returning from meetings with regional development councils, provided another dimension of their success. Urban planners across 7 states have adopted what they're calling resilient community design. It's defensive architecture disguised as environmental sustainability. Every new development naturally channels criminal activities into areas of maximum community oversight. This represented the highest evolution of Green Beret methodology, not just defeating enemies, but transforming entire societies until normal functions became sophisticated defense mechanisms. Harrison had implemented similar strategies in conflict zones worldwide, but never with such organic adoption and evolution. "Federal agencies are studying the phenomenon," Doc reported, reviewing official assessments. Their analysts can't explain how criminal organizations are losing operational capability across entire regions without visible security measures. They're looking for traditional counter-cartel tactics, but missing the fundamental transformation of social dynamics. Elena's network provided intelligence that demonstrated another aspect of their strategic success. The Interfaith Council has integrated what they call community harmony initiatives into regular programs. Every social gathering becomes an opportunity for coordinated observation and response, all while appearing completely natural. Criminal organizations are facing a new reality, Ghost noted, analyzing intelligence feeds. They can't fight what they can't identify or understand. Every attempt to adapt their operations reveals more vulnerabilities while strengthening community resilience. They're not just losing territory, they're losing the ability to operate effectively anywhere. This model spreads. Harrison moved to the command center's main display, studying patterns of civilian activity that represented incredibly sophisticated coordination invisible to outside observers. This is what we learned in the most challenging special forces operations. The most effective resistance isn't about confrontation. It's about transforming societies until normal daily activities become part of an undefeatable defense network. Through their monitoring systems, they tracked the institutional adoption of their strategic victory. Government agencies, businesses, and community organizations had developed sophisticated integration methods adapted to their specific contexts. Each implementation inspired others, creating an evolving network of civilian defense that grew stronger through diversity and adaptation. This is why Green Beret methods are uniquely effective, Harrison explained to visiting policymakers. We don't just win tactical battles, we transform environments until the enemy's traditional advantages become catastrophic vulnerabilities. Every normal activity becomes part of an invisible but undefeatable resistance network. The afternoon sun illuminated the Arizona landscape as Harrison observed the continued evolution of what they had initiated. What began as one farmer's stand against injustice had become a movement that no criminal organization could effectively encounter, because its strength lay not in confrontation, but in the transformation of ordinary life into extraordinary resistance. Remember, he told his team as they reviewed the institutional changes spreading across the region, the greatest victory isn't in defeating your enemies. It's in building something they can't effectively fight against. When entire societies transform their daily activities into sophisticated defense networks, no amount of force or intimidation can impose control through fear. 6 weeks after their initial victory, Harrison received intelligence that revealed the true depth of their strategic success. Academic institutions across the country had begun studying what they called the Verde Valley phenomenon, not realizing they were observing the principles of advanced unconventional warfare applied to civilian defense. Major universities are incorporating case studies of our region into their criminal justice programs, Ghost reported, monitoring academic databases. They're analyzing what they perceive as spontaneous community resistance, but they're missing the deeper principle. We didn't create a new security system. We transformed the fundamental nature of community interaction. Harrison studied the latest data streams showing civilian activity patterns across multiple states. The transformation had transcended tactical success, evolving into a new model of social organization that naturally prevented criminal enterprises from establishing operational footholds. The Department of Agriculture has launched what they're calling the Rural Community Resilience Initiative, Doc announced, reviewing government communications. They think they're implementing an agricultural support program. In reality, they're replicating our network of coordinated civilian defense disguised as farming cooperation. James Chen, a retired judge who had helped coordinate legal aspects of their operation, arrived with reports that demonstrated the sophistication of their success. Bar associations across 3 states have developed new frameworks for community legal defense. Every standard legal proceeding now incorporates elements that make criminal operations more visible while appearing completely routine. Through their surveillance systems, they observed developments that showcase the evolutionary nature of their victory. State legislatures had begun passing laws that appeared to focus on economic development but actually reinforced community defense networks. Educational systems had integrated strategic awareness into standard curricula. Even social media platforms had become effective tools for coordinated resistance while appearing entirely normal. "Sir," Ghost called out, analyzing international data. Criminal organizations worldwide are fundamentally altering their operational doctrines. They're designating entire regions as strategically inverted zones, areas where traditional methods of establishing control become self-defeating. Every attempt to assert influence actually strengthens community resistance. Blade, returning from consultations with national security advisors, provided another dimension of their success. Military academies are studying what they perceive as a new model of civilian defense. They think they're observing spontaneous community organization. In reality, they're witnessing the highest evolution of special forces methodology, turning entire populations into undefeatable resistance networks. This represented the ultimate fulfillment of Green Beret principles, not just winning battles or securing territories, but transforming societies until normal functions became sophisticated defense mechanisms. Harrison had implemented similar strategies in conflict zones worldwide, but never with such profound and far-reaching effects. Think tanks are publishing analyses of the phenomenon, Doc reported, reviewing academic papers. Their experts can't explain how criminal organizations are losing operational capability across entire regions without visible security measures. They're searching for traditional defense mechanisms, but missing the fundamental transformation of social dynamics. Elena's expanded network provided intelligence that demonstrated another aspect of their strategic success. Religious organizations nationwide have integrated what they call community harmony programs into their regular activities. Every social gathering becomes an opportunity for coordinated observation and response, all while appearing completely natural. "We're seeing a complete paradigm shift," Ghost noted, analyzing global intelligence feeds. Criminal organizations can't adapt to this new reality. Every attempt to modify their operations reveals more vulnerabilities while strengthening community resilience. They're not just losing territory, they're losing the ability to comprehend what they're fighting against. Harrison moved to the command center's main display, studying patterns of civilian activity that represented incredibly sophisticated coordination invisible to outside observers. This is what we learned in the most challenging special forces. Operations. The most effective resistance isn't about fighting enemies. It's about transforming societies until normal daily activities become part of an undefeatable defense network. Through their monitoring systems, they track the institutional adoption of their strategic victory. Government agencies, businesses, and community organizations had developed sophisticated integration methods adapted to their specific contexts. Each implementation inspired others, creating an evolving network of civilian defense that grew stronger through diversity and adaptation. This is why Green Beret methods are uniquely powerful, Harrison explained to visiting military strategists. We don't just win tactical battles. We transform environments until the enemy's traditional advantages become catastrophic vulnerabilities. Every normal activity becomes part of an invisible but undefeatable resistance network. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Arizona landscape as Harrison observed the continued evolution of what they had initiated. What began as one farmer's stand against injustice had become a movement that no criminal organization could effectively counter, because its strength lay not in confrontation, but in the transformation of ordinary life into extraordinary resistance. "Remember," he told his team as they reviewed the profound changes spreading across the nation, "the greatest victory isn't in defeating your enemies. It's in building something they can't effectively fight against." When entire societies transform their daily activities into sophisticated defense networks, no amount of force or intimidation can impose control through fear. 2 months after their initial stand, Harrison walked his property in the early morning light, reflecting on how victory had transformed not just strategies and systems, but individual lives. Through his farm's sophisticated monitoring systems, he observed patterns that revealed the deepest success of their operation: the restoration of human dignity in the face of intimidation. Sarah Bennett, whose family had nearly lost their farm to cartel pressure, now coordinated an expanding network of agricultural communities. Her voice carried new confidence as she reported over their secure channels. 3 more farming cooperatives have adopted our mutual support model. Every new member strengthens not just our security, but our ability to withstand economic pressures. The cartels can't find leverage points anymore. We're too integrated, too resilient. Through Ghost's surveillance systems, they monitored the profound impact on individual families. Parents who once lived in fear now walked their children to school with quiet confidence. Small business owners who had faced extortion now operated freely within their reinforced community networks. Every personal victory contributed to their strategic success. "We're seeing remarkable changes in individual behavior patterns," Ghost reported, analyzing social data. "People aren't just safer, they're more engaged, more connected. Every community gathering, every business meeting, every social event naturally reinforces our defensive network while strengthening personal bonds." Elena's grandson, Miguel, who had helped coordinate youth involvement, provided insight into the next generation's transformation. "The kids in my coding class aren't just learning technology. They're understanding how to build systems that protect their communities. Every project becomes an opportunity to strengthen our collective resilience while developing individual skills." Harrison observed these developments with the experienced eye of a Special Forces veteran. This was the true measure of their success. Not just defeating an enemy, but empowering individuals to build something stronger than any threat they faced. "Latest intelligence shows something remarkable," Doc reported, reviewing psychological impact assessments. "The fear that once paralyzed individual action has been replaced by quiet confidence. People aren't just resisting intimidation. They're creating new ways to support each other that make intimidation impossible." Through their monitoring systems, they tracked how individual transformations contributed to their strategic victory. A local teacher had integrated situational awareness into her science curriculum, teaching children to observe and understand their environment. A grocery store owner had developed a customer service system that naturally identified suspicious patterns while improving community connections. "Sir," Ghost called out, monitoring regional communications, "we're seeing personal initiatives spreading beyond our original network. Individuals who never considered themselves defenders are creating innovative ways to protect their communities. Every success story inspires others to find their own strength." Blade, returning from community defense workshops, shared observations that demonstrated the depth of their impact. People aren't just learning tactical responses. They're understanding how their daily choices contribute to collective security. Every individual who stands up becomes an inspiration for others to find their courage. This represented the highest achievement of Green Beret methodology, not just winning military victories, but transforming how individuals perceive their role in community defense. Harrison had seen similar principles succeed in conflict zones, worldwide, but never with such profound personal impact. The real victory, Harrison explained to his team, isn't in the systems we've built or the strategies we've implemented. It's in how individuals have discovered their capacity for extraordinary achievement. Every person who finds their strength becomes a foundation for others to build upon. Elena arrived with stories that demonstrated this personal transformation. A widow who once lived in fear had organized her church group into an effective community support network. A retired mechanic had turned his workshop into a gathering place where neighbors naturally shared information while building stronger connections. Criminal organizations can't adapt to this new reality, Ghost noted, analyzing intelligence feeds. They're not just facing coordinated resistance. They're encountering individuals who've discovered their own power. Every attempt to intimidate now strengthens personal resolve while exposing operational vulnerabilities. Through their surveillance systems, they tracked how individual actions rippled through their expanded network. A farmer's decision to stand firm inspired others to resist pressure. A small business owner's innovative security measures were adapted and improved by others. Each personal victory contributed to their collective strength. Remember, Harrison told visiting community leaders, the greatest achievement isn't in defeating threats. It's in helping individuals discover their capacity for extraordinary courage. When people understand their daily choices can protect their community, they transform from potential victims into undefeatable defenders. The morning sun illuminated the Arizona landscape as Harrison observed the continued evolution of what they had initiated. What began as one farmer's stand against injustice had become a movement that empowered individuals to transform their normal activities into powerful acts of resistance. This is why we succeeded, he explained to his team. We didn't just implement strategies or build systems, we showed people their own strength. When individuals discover their power to protect what they love, no force can impose control through fear. 3 months after their initial victory, Harrison stood on his porch at dawn, watching farmers prepare their fields for the next growing season. The sight carried deeper meaning now. Each tractor moving with purpose, each worker alert and aware, every normal activity part of an invisible but unbreakable defense network that had transformed the region. The Agricultural Commission has adopted our cooperative model nationwide, Ghost reported, monitoring official communications. They think they're implementing an economic support program, but they're actually replicating our defense network. Every farming community that joins strengthens not just their security, but their independence from criminal influence. Through their sophisticated monitoring systems, Harrison observed patterns that revealed the lasting impact of their operation. Local businesses had developed natural immunity to criminal infiltration. Community organizations had evolved sophisticated awareness without losing their fundamental warmth and openness. The transformation had become self-sustaining. Latest analysis shows something remarkable, Doc announced, reviewing long-term impact studies. The psychological changes we initiated have taken root at a cultural level. Communities aren't just resisting intimidation, they're creating new social structures that make intimidation impossible. Every connection strengthens their collective resilience. Elena, whose family had faced cartel pressure for generations, provided perspective that demonstrated the depth of change. My granddaughter asked me yesterday what it was like to be afraid. She can't imagine living in fear anymore. That's our real victory. We've changed how the next generation sees their world and their place in it. Harrison reflected on his years of Special Forces experience. He'd led missions across the globe, but none had achieved such profound and lasting transformation. This wasn't just about defeating an enemy, it was about changing the fundamental dynamics that allowed enemies to exist. "Sir," Ghost called out, analyzing regional data, "criminal organizations have completely abandoned their traditional expansion models in areas where our influence has spread. They're not just avoiding direct confrontation, they're unable to conceptualize how to establish control in communities that have embraced our principles." Blade, returning from training sessions with neighboring communities, shared observations that revealed another dimension of their success. The knowledge transfer has become organic. Communities aren't just copying our methods, they're improving them, adapting them to their specific needs. Every innovation strengthens the entire network. Through their surveillance systems, they tracked how their initial victory had catalyzed lasting change. Schools naturally incorporated strategic awareness into their curricula. Business associations had developed immune systems against criminal infiltration. Religious organizations had become centers of community resilience while maintaining their spiritual focus. "The transformation has reached a critical threshold," Harrison explained to his team. "It's no longer dependent on our guidance or support. These communities have developed their own evolutionary capacity. Each challenge they face makes them stronger, more adaptive, more resilient." Sarah Bennett, now coordinating regional agricultural cooperation, provided evidence of this self-sustaining change. Farmers who once competed now instinctively support each other. When one community faces pressure, others respond automatically. The network has developed its own intelligence, its own immune system. Criminal organizations can't adapt to this new reality, Ghost noted, monitoring international communications. They're facing something beyond their comprehension. Communities that strengthen under pressure, networks that grow more resilient with each challenge. Their traditional methods of establishing control have become counterproductive. This represented the highest achievement of Green Beret methodology, not just winning battles or securing territories, but transforming societies until they naturally resist oppression. Harrison had implemented similar strategies worldwide, but never with such profound and lasting effect. "The real victory," he told visiting military strategists, "isn't in the systems we've built or the networks we've established. It's in how these communities have internalized the principles of collective resilience. They don't just resist intimidation, they've become naturally immune to it." Through their monitoring systems, they tracked how this transformation continued to evolve and spread. Each community that adopted their principles became a teacher for others. Every successful resistance inspired new innovations. The network grew stronger through diversity and adaptation. "Remember," Harrison told his team as they observed these developments, "this is why Green Berets are different. We don't just fight enemies, we transform environments until the very concept of enemy control becomes impossible. When communities discover their collective strength, no force can impose control through fear." The morning sun climbed higher over the Arizona desert as Harrison reflected on the legacy they had created. What began as one farmer's stand against injustice had evolved into something beyond any tactical victory, a fundamental transformation in how communities understood and protected their freedom. "This is our enduring achievement," he explained, to Elena and her family. "We haven't just defeated one threat or secured one region. We've shown people how to build something that grows stronger with each challenge, something that transforms pressure into strength, resistance into resilience. That's a legacy that will outlast any single victory." 4 months after their initial victory, Harrison discovered an unexpected dimension to their success while reviewing intelligence reports with Ghost. A new pattern had emerged that went beyond their tactical achievements or even their strategic transformation of the community. Their model of resistance had begun inspiring changes in unexpected places. "Sir, you need to see this," Ghost called out, analyzing data streams from across the continent. "We're picking up chatter from indigenous communities in Mexico, adopting our methods to protect their lands from illegal logging operations. They've modified our agricultural cooperation model into something uniquely their own." Harrison moved to her monitoring station, studying feeds that showed how their principles of community defense had evolved in ways he'd never anticipated. Each group that adopted their methods transformed them, creating innovations that strengthened the entire network. "The adaptations are remarkable," Doc added, reviewing reports from tribal leaders. "They're not just copying our tactics, they're integrating them with traditional knowledge systems. Every community that embraces these principles adds its own wisdom, its own cultural strength to the network." Through their surveillance systems, they observed how their initial victory had sparked a chain reaction of empowerment. Remote villages had developed early warning systems disguised as traditional festivals. Ancient farming practices merged with modern coordination techniques. Each adaptation made the network stronger, more diverse, more resilient. "This goes beyond what we achieved in special forces," Harrison reflected, watching communities transform age-old traditions into sophisticated defense mechanisms. "We're not just teaching resistance, we're helping people rediscover their inherent strength, their cultural wisdom." Elena arrived with news that demonstrated another dimension of their expanding influence. The elders from the Tohono O'odham Nation visited yesterday. They've been watching how we integrated modern technology with community traditions. They see possibilities we never imagined. The morning sun cast long shadows across Harrison's farm as he considered these developments. Their tactical victory against the cartel had opened doors to something far more profound, a renaissance of community wisdom adapted for modern challenges. Multiple indigenous groups requesting consultation, Ghost reported, monitoring encrypted channels. "They're not looking for military training or tactical advice. They want to understand how we helped communities rediscover their power to protect what matters." Blade, returning from meetings with tribal security councils, shared observations that revealed the depth of this evolution. Every nation that adopts these principles transforms them into something unique. The Yaqui are integrating them with their ceremonial traditions. The Mayo have adapted them for river valley defense. Each interpretation strengthens the whole. This represented an unexpected fulfillment of Green Beret methodology, not just defeating enemies or securing territories, but helping communities rediscover and reinvent their traditional strengths. Harrison had seen similar principles succeed in conflict zones worldwide, but never with such organic cultural integration. "The transformation has reached a new phase," he explained to his team. "We're not just changing how communities defend themselves. We're helping them remember who they are, what they're capable of. Each group that embraces these principles adds its own wisdom to the network." Through their monitoring systems, they tracked how traditional knowledge systems enhanced their modern security protocols. Ancient signal methods improved their communication networks. Traditional farming techniques strengthened their resource independence. Every cultural adaptation made the system more robust. "This is why Green Berets are different," Harrison told visiting tribal leaders. "We don't just teach tactics or strategy. We help communities discover how their own traditions, their own wisdom, can protect what they value. When people reconnect with their cultural strength, they become naturally resistant to outside control. The afternoon sun illuminated the Arizona landscape as Harrison observed the continued evolution of what they had initiated. What began as one farmer's stand against a cartel had become a catalyst for cultural revival, inspiring communities to transform their traditions into sources of modern strength. "Remember," he told his team, "our greatest achievement isn't in the systems we've built or the battles we've won. It's in helping people rediscover their inherent power, their cultural wisdom. When communities remember who they are and what they're capable of, they become naturally immune to intimidation and control." This legacy, Harrison realized, would outlast any tactical victory or strategic success. They had helped spark a renaissance of community wisdom, showing people how to transform their cultural heritage into a source of modern strength. Each group that embraced these principles added its own wisdom to the network, creating something more powerful and resilient than any single model could achieve. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.